Hi, my name is Frank Schaeffer, and I am the son of someone who became a famous evangelical theologian and evangelist, Francis Schaeffer. And my dad wrote a book once, amongst many others he wrote, that became bestsellers called True Spirituality. And I would like to revisit that topic now with my own twist. What is true spirituality? Why do we seek spirituality at all? I have traveled a long way from my evangelical background, as I talk about in my book, Crazy for God. And I'm regarded by evangelicals as a heretic because I left my background of saved and secure knowledge that Jesus had died for my sins, would soon come back, take all the believers with him, kill just about everybody else, and usher in the new Eden. I find the claims of Christianity ridiculous. I find the claims of Islam ridiculous. I find the claims of Hinduism ridiculous. I find the claims of every religion that believes in the certainty of correct theology ridiculous. And I find them dangerous. The war in the Middle East right now is between religious fanatics. Sure, most Jews are not religious fanatics, and most people living in Islamic cultures, so-called, are not religious fanatics. But the minorities in both of those cultures, the West Bank settlers stealing land, the Palestinian terrorists of Hamas, Hezbollah, etc. These are fanatics. The mirror image of those fanatics is right here in the United States with the Christian nationalist project of the Republican Party. In fact, religious fanatics all over the world have been causing pain and chaos. The Iranian mullahs killing young women in prison for not wearing a head covering, murdering people. The princes, so-called, of the Saudi regime, having people murdered all over the world, having people murdered in their own country, women raped and tortured in prison for asking for rights. Fundamentalist religion is a mess, always has been, always will be. Edward III, King of England, who launched the 100 Years' War by battling for the crown of France with the French king, was praying to the same God the French king was, and they were both at the same time killing each other. And Edward III believed in chivalry. He also believed in having his troops murder, rape, and pillage his way through small French villages in the name of God. And then he would pray to the Virgin Mary and ask for her blessing in his next battle. He and the French king would both seek the blessing of the same Pope for their battles with each other. And this was just in Christendom. The Islamic hordes poured out of the Arabian desert into North Africa and beyond in the 7th century, converting people by the power of the sword. They're still doing it. That's what's going on in Iran. That's what's going on in Saudi Arabia. That's what Hezbollah is all about. They imagine Palestine free of Jews, not because the Jews left for New York City, but because they were driven into the ocean. And meanwhile, the settlers on the West Bank have been shooting Palestinians in revenge for the terror attacks across the southern border with Gaza. This is an ugly picture. Hindu nationalism is an ugly picture. The Hindu government is alleged by the Canadian government to have had a Sikh activist in Canada murdered, very much like Vladimir Putin murders people across the world, with, by the way, the support of the fundamentalist, radicalized Russian Orthodox Church and Archbishop Kirill of Moscow, who supports Putin's murder because of a church dispute with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, an underreported fact. I could go on this, but I'm not going to. What I'm saying is that true spirituality has nothing to do with religion. In fact, most spiritual people I know are anti-religious, religious phobic, if you like, not just Islamic phobic, not Christian phobic, religious phobic, with good reason. The track record of fundamentalist radical religion is horrible. Sadly, it's not the minority of religious people who fall into that camp and or give quiet acquiescence to that camp, the way many evangelicals in America quietly are going along with the Trump cult now and the far-right, armed, radical, hate-filled Trump cult, in the name of reestablishing God knows what in America as a Christian country with their anti-gay, anti-black, anti-woman rhetoric, rolling back choice, this checklist of things that Amy Coney Barrett and the others on the Supreme Court have to bring America back to God. What? Back to God the way we were when we were lynching Black people? back to God when we were segregated, back to God when we were enslaving people, back to God when we were murdering gay people who were found out to be gay, if not forcing them into therapy, quote unquote, to heal the gay out of them. Religion has a terrible track record, but spirituality, not so much. So, what is true spirituality? Well, I'm going to speak in a way that I think runs counter to a lot of influencers and counter to a lot of psychobabble and counter to the spirit of the day, which is all about ego and the self. And we hear things like, you should forgive yourself, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's all about the self or making one feel better by concentrating on your inner self. True spirituality, it seems to me, is the opposite of that. The opposite of the psychobabble of self-worth and all the rest of it. You see, where we go wrong in our reaction to Christianity and Islam and Hinduism and Judaism in their violent iterations, in our own spirituality, a more enlightened spirituality, is not recognize something. And that is, first of all, spirituality is not afraid of truth. Spirituality is not afraid of science. Spirituality is not afraid of history. Spirituality doesn't take a side in human conflict, but recognizes that the problem is that we are humans, not the religion. We grasp at the religious certainty because we humans are semi-evolved primates on our way, hopefully, to a better future, but certainly not there yet. So the first lesson of the sort of spirituality that I believe is enlightening is humility. The humility to admit that liberals and woke people and Democrats and conservative Republicans and right-wing Trump cultists and Hindu nationalists and Christian nationalists and Zionists seizing West Bank territory and even murdering Palestinians in revenge on the West Bank, Palestinian terrorists, we, and I say we, are all in the same boat. It is a boat of semi-evolved ignorance that cannot be cured by psychobabble about getting rid of hatred or multiculturalism or sensitivity training. These are Band-Aids. The real problem is human ego and a lack of humility. As I said once before somewhere else in another context, nobody ever blew up an abortion clinic by first yelling, "But I could be wrong." Nobody in Hamas stormed over the border saying, "This could be a mistake." Nobody grabbed the West Bank village of a small Palestinian Bedouin camp saying, maybe we're in error. Certainty is the beginning of a lack of spirituality. Certainty is the opposite of spirituality because it is the opposite of humility. Humility always allows for the possibility, including everything I'm saying right here, that I could be in error, or you could be in error, or we could be in error. Spirituality does not sit around judging others by some level of perfection, but realizes instead that the human race is semi-evolved and therefore is incapable of achieving perfection ever, in any circumstance. Science understands this because tomorrow's scientific study will build on and even contradict today's scientific study on some subject and admit that we, speaking for the scientific community, of which I am not a part, but as if I were for the moment, were wrong or only understood half of this truth. Astrophysics pushes on the boundaries all the time. So does biology. So does geneticists. Scientific work. An open mind is a humble mind. A closed mind is an arrogant mind, even if part of that closed mind is preaching absolute humility. Anybody who thinks that the solution to the, quote, Israel problem is to push Israeli citizens into the ocean and has a certainty that in doing so, if you're killed, you will become a martyr, is deluded. But delusion still kills. As we well know from the violence that we saw on January 6th in the attempt to overthrow our government by people who were certain that they were right and certain that the con artist they were following, Donald Trump, was telling the truth when he said the election was stolen. This is the same problem globally. Doesn't matter if you're Jewish or Christian or an atheist or an agnostic or a scientist or a preacher. We all suffer from a semi-evolved brain, the new brain and the old brain at war with each other. Bits of our brain, 200,000-300,000 years old, haven't evolved much since then, unable to grasp bigger concepts such as, for instance, climate change and really deal with it. Too big for us. We are little, we are small, we are underdeveloped. So the first thing we do is admit this. And the second thing we do when it comes to spirituality is to stop thinking that the answer lies within. All this nonsense of if you meditate longer and look within and forgive yourself, everything will be fine. I have a proposition for you. Do you want to find joy in this life through spirituality? If the answer is yes, quit looking inside and start looking out. This morning, I went to my local tire joint, a gas station up the road that does tire work. I love the decorations there. I made a tiny little video about it, a little 59-second thing for places that only take 59-second videos, because they have this incredible collection of old stuff from garages from the 30s and 40s, and an old Coke machine and a gas and air machine, and all the posters for things that are no longer even made. Something like a Smithsonian room of an old tire garage would be. And this is all real, by the way. And I happen to know the guy who was changing my tires, and I happen to know the guys who work there because I stop, and I've got a pressure light that comes on in my little Subaru, and I don't know what it is, but they always fix it and add pressure to my tires. They never charge a dime. So, of course, when I change my tires, that's where I go. And I needed a new set of tires before winter here in New England, where I live. And I happen to know that one of the guys up there, who's a pretty gruff guy, is undergoing treatment for cancer. And I talked to him about that. And we got into a discussion that lasted about 20 minutes about his radiation therapy protocol and what he needs, and the fact that his own car isn't working very well, and that he borrowed a friend's car, and who's taking care of him. And it followed up on another discussion we had. And the fact that it seemed to take a little bit of the pain away so he could be listened to made my day. Much more than if I'd gone to some therapy myself. Much more than if I'd sat down and meditated, God forbid, and looked within, in myself. By looking outside myself, by not having earbuds in and not looking at my cell phone and saying, how are you, and meaning it, and knowing enough about him from our last conversation when he gave me a little free air in his tires to say, how is the treatment going? Have you started radiation therapy today? And he says, well, they're starting today, but they've tattooed the place on my body that they're going to do the therapy on both sides to pinpoint where it is. And today they're bringing me in just for a practice session. So when I come in next week, because I'll be going once a week now for 7 weeks, I'll be more relaxed. And we talked about the whole thing. And in the conversation, we were talking about his ex-wife and a girlfriend that's taking care of him during this time. And there was a human connection there. And so when I left, and after the tires were changed, and I gave him a pat on the shoulder and said, I'm going to stop by next week to see how the treatment's going, I got a smile that was all the therapy I needed that day. If someone asked me after that, why are you on this earth? It would be simple. For that day, it's because that 20-minute conversation meant something to someone that is a so-called casual acquaintance, not a friend, not a family member, no one I owe anything to. I'm paying for the tire change. And it sounds like altruism. Oh, you know, Frank Schaeffer's trying to say what a good guy he is. He stopped and talked to someone. No, bullshit. Selfish, but enlightened selfishness. The kind of enlightened selfishness that means I know every neighbor on my street. They ask after me when Jeannie had a heart attack. My wife, I've been married to 53 years, 2 years ago. I couldn't walk 50 feet down my street in my neighborhood without someone tapping on the window, because our New England houses are close to the street. None of these big yards between you and the neighbors. In the 18th and 16th and 17th, well, it wasn't 16th, 17th and 18th century, the houses were built close to the street because you could get off your horse and get into your house without going up a long drive. Who was going to plow the drive. There were no snowplows. Tap on the window. How's Jeannie? It meant that I was never alone. You get back what you put in. When I hear about the loneliness epidemic and all these poor young people raised on cell phones with earbuds who can't make eye contact or even carry on much of a conversation, who seem to be living in a sound bubble, closed off from the world, who one reads about have problem dating and have to go online to meet people, etc. This loneliness epidemic, as our families have unraveled because of social media. Talk about a dark, backward pun. Social, anti-social media made a few people rich and the rest of us impoverished and alone, impoverished in the soul. So what is true spirituality? Well, one thing it is reaching out unselfishly to people, but for a good selfish motive. There is such a thing as self-care, but it's not what people think. It's not looking within. Sorry, that's my 10 cents worth. It's not that. It's not all these meditative practices to make you feel good about yourself. Fine, meditation's good. Go do it. But don't think that it's spirituality. Making yourself feel better about yourself is not spirituality that is going to pay dividends. Spirituality that pays dividends is taking the time to not look in yourself, but look into the eyes of someone else and make a connection, starting with those closest to you. People ask Jeannie and me sometimes, how have you stayed married for 53 years? Especially they ask that if they know me, because I'm a difficult SOB a lot of the time, or have been in the past. Not so much these days. I've learned a few things. But one thing we've always done is listen to each other. We've always talked. We've had time for each other. We're very practical about our relationship, what we do, sexuality, all the rest. We discuss things. The same goes with my children. In spite of all my failings as a father, the temper that I had as a young man raised to believe men are supposed to be in charge, all this horror show that I got from my evangelical background about patriarchal dominance of females and children and all the rest of it, took years to get over, including therapy. But at the end of the day, I have a good idea of what real spirituality is. And it's not the cheap, glib answers of religion. And it's not the psychobabble, look within bullshit to make you feel better in some Hollywood spa retreat. It's the conversation you had with someone where they left knowing you really care about them and you will check up on them. Again, this is not, oh, be nice, good guy stuff. This is the purest form of selfishness. And that is that by reaching out to others, you find joy. By becoming important in their lives, you feel important. The less you concentrate on yourself and the more you look at others, the more eye contact you make, the more, quote, casual conversations you allow to run deep. The sincerity of asking, how are you, and meaning it, and asking further questions and remembering from the last conversation so that you can pick up where you left off. That is when you walk away, having given of yourself to another by making real contact and interest. That is where the satisfaction is. That is where the spiritual connection is. It's the very opposite of the horror of evangelical fundamentalism, the horror of Islamic fundamentalism, the horror of fundamentalist Judaism, the horror of taking one of these quote unquote holy books, these made up tales by people, be that the Bible, the Quran, or the writing, the Hindu beliefs and traditions and writings, all fine to enjoy in an archival sense of spirituality, the track record of other people, the Psalms, the Proverbs, whatever it may be. Lots of all kinds of truths in there because humans who also were learning, just like I'm learning and sharing this with you, wrote some stories down. But the horror show of a literal interpretation that says this book gave us the land or whatever it may be, look at the consequences. World war after world war in Europe. Russia attacking Ukraine right now with the blessing of Patriarch Kirill of Moscow, the archbishop who says that the Ukrainian church must be punished for its heresy and feeds Putin's delusion. The delusion of the religious right in America today that costs about Christian nationalism and retaking our country for God, the kind of checklist that people like Amy Coney Barrett raised in an evangelical / Roman Catholic cult herself, not just the Roman Catholic Church, a cult attached to that church with its rules and regulations, including handmaidens, talk about an unfortunate turn of phrase for them, where older women were telling younger women what to do, anti-abortion, all the rest of it. And what do you have? But our secular culture, our non-Christian culture, our anti-Christian culture doesn't really do any better. Because in reaction to the stupidity of Christianity, say the idea that virginity was somehow sacrosanct, and if you weren't a virgin when you were married, it was a sin. The overreaction to that in the sexual revolution that wanted to find a new way and somehow separated affection and love from sex. I have no problem with separating procreation from sex. Oh, what a relief it was when Jeannie went through menopause and we had to stop messing around as we did for years with all sorts of contraceptive devices and all the rest of that. But the fact of the matter is, to separate sexuality from affection, from commitment, from the passion of long-term friendship, it's not wrong in the sense of evil or sinful. It's stupid. And all the loneliness we have around us and all the people who mess around and then can't make a relationship stick and can't commit and find they're suddenly 30, 33 years old and relating to marriage as if it's somehow of a capstone instead of a relationship being the cornerstone of your whole life. It's just the next cool thing you do. And all the fertility cycles that are out of whack because people are putting all sorts of things first, career, money, have a house, whatever it may be, ahead of simple love and passion, following the blueprint that evolution herself gave us. This too is part of the problem. It's its own kind of fundamentalism. It's workism, which is America's only real religion, workism. But you see, when you engage with other people, to take this morning's example, okay, I had things to do. He had things to do. But he also found someone who would talk in detail. Having had some medical problems myself, I know the lingo, not cancer, fortunately, yet, although my dad died of it, probably waiting for me somewhere down the road. But that 20 minutes was the 20 minutes that meant the most to me today, however he took it. But judging by the expression on his face, it meant something to him too. But it meant me, instead of looking inward, looking outward, basically for one day anyway, this 24 hours, I know why I'm here. And that will be reaffirmed again when I pick up my youngest grandchild at school today. I'm already planning what I'm going to cook for her. Yes, in between those things, I have stuff to do. I have some writing to do. I have career, whatever things. But we're talking about spirituality here. I'm not going off trying to find myself. I'm trying to find you. I'm trying to find other people. By looking deeply within another human, that's where I find myself. It may sound counterintuitive, but that's true spirituality. Thank you for your patience. And let me finish again by saying what I said earlier. I could be wrong. My name is Frank Schaefer.